So today we're going to go through the esophagus pathology. You know, the esophagus pathology for the church today and tomorrow. Tomorrow we will 10 and 11. I just bring some handy slides so we can go on both lectures today. If we can't, so we can continue tomorrow, but most likely we will. Okay? We might take a few minutes extra, just a few minutes. I didn't take your time or your rest time or something. I like to go on time, but we might need a few minutes. If we pay attention well, we will not need that. We'll finish the esophagus today. The two lectures, esophageal pathology complete, so we're going to come tomorrow between 10 and 11, okay? So as usual, we start our lecture with close your cell phone. Don't bother me. If I see anybody playing in his cell phone, I will really bother me. Or there. Like it. You know, we're going to go through the esophageal pathology, and as I said, and as we do always, we will focus only on whatever you need to learn, no more, no less. Just whatever you need to learn at this stage, at this level of your mid school. So we'll start with the lacerations. Lacerations in the esophagus are really important. We have many types of lacerations. The most common one is the mallory waist tears. Is the most common one. Most of the time, it associates with severe retching, vomiting. It's really common in those alcoholic and those with the pink alcohol intoxication. Usually in any tears in the esophagus, usually it presents with hematemesis, regardless of the type of the laceration. Just remember that mallory waist lacerations are the most common one, and usually so mallory waist lacerations are the most common laceration. Remember the hematemesis, and the pathology for these lacerations most of the time, actually all the time, is just superficial. So we have superficial linear, shown as a linear superficial laceration as a mucosa. Usually, most of these lacerations are superficial. So we expect the healing to be really fast, and the best to do with these patients will just give them alone conservative management, and they will be fine in a very short time. So longitudinal, usually it's here at the level of the mucosa, just mucosa. Never reach mallory waist, never reach the muscularis. The other type of laceration is the Pereb syndrome. This is the really serious one. Why? Because in this one, you know the same. The patient coming with hematemesis, usually vomiting, itching, all of these that increase the pressure within the esophagus can cause these lacerations. But this type of laceration is really important. Why? Because it's so deep. It includes the muscularis and it go outside the esophageal wall. If there's any tear, any rupture, any whatever that reach the outside of the esophagus, it means mediastinized. It's really severe and really important clinically. So it can cause severe acute mediastinized. Sometimes very painful. It looks like a myocardial infarction. So keep in mind this type of laceration, syndrome. It's a deep laceration that reach the mediastinum and it causes acute mediastinitis. The management is against of what we have talked about, we have said about the pathologies. We said just the elevation alone will be fine in a very short time. And this one, most of the time, we need to interfere surgically to close the window between the esophagus and the periphery of the esophagus. Chemical esophagitis, a variety of irritants can damage the mucosa, alcohol, corrosive. Sometimes kids by mistake they take these corrosive, these alkali, this excessive fluid, hot fluid, heavy smoking also can cause the chemical esophagitis. The pill-induced esophagitis, it's simple as patient take pills and it's stuck in the esophagus and cause the chemical esophagitis. Usually, again, it's a self-limited disease. Most of the time, the healing is very short and there is no problem with the chemical esophagitis. Sometimes it can cause, if it's repeatable, if it's severe, sometimes it can cause hemorrhage, can cause structure, rarely can cause perforation in severe cases. Now, infectious esophagitis. This is the important one, and it's really clinically important. Why? Because we have a lot of cases clinically presenting to the GI because of the esophageal esophagitis. In this area, you need to memorize 3 types of most common infections, most common causes of the esophagitis or infectious esophagitis. 3 of them. You need to remember the clinical presentation. You need to remember the pathology, gross pathology of them. You need to remember the microscopic pathology of them. This is a very common area for questions. If you have a question in the esophagus, most of the time you get it from this area, the infectious esophagitis, or you will get it from the reflex pharynx, or you will get it from the neoplastic process. No way to get it outside of these 3 areas. So for the infectious esophagitis, remember, as I said, 3. Remember the cytomegalovirus, the herpes, so the herpes, cytomegalovirus, and the fungus, which is the candida. So fungus, candida, cytomegalovirus, and the herpes. As I said, you need to remember the clinical presentation of each of them, the gross pathology, what we see in the endoscopy, and what we see in the microscopic examination. Each of these very important 3 infectious etiology agents. Of course, we can, in some cases, we can see other infectious etiology, mucormycosis, sometimes acute bacterial esophagitis, but it's really rare. Most of the time in clinical practice, we would have these, most of the time, these 3. So herpes, cytomegalovirus, and the candida or the fungus. So how we see each of them? If we start with the candida, you know the candida or the fungal with the or candida esophagitis or fungal esophagitis, it's same as any fungal esophagitis or candida esophagitis. Anywhere around the mouth, everywhere, it shows the same gross pathology or the same appearance, clinical appearance. Usually in candida, we see those membranes, gray, white membranes. No matter where the site of the infection, around the mouth, I said, anywhere, any mucosa, you see gray, white membrane. But this is the way we see the fungus, grossly. In the microscopic examination, we see the spores and the hyphae. So spores and hyphae. Many times in the background, we see acute inflammatory infiltrate. The components of these membranes, as I said, we see gray, whitish membrane. The component of this gray, whitish membrane is just acute inflammatory exudate plus the candida or the hyphae and the spores. So this is for the candida. Candida, most of the time, see patient, people patient or patient taking, chemotherapy or most of the time. But it can be seen in healthy patients, most of the time in this kind of patient. The other one, the cytomegalovirus, and I said same thing. Most of the time, it's seen in patients taking chemotherapy, taking some medication, but it can be seen in other healthy patients. Cytomegalovirus, remember, cytomegalovirus. We have viral inclusion. The viral inclusion in the cytomegalovirus can be both in the cytoplasm and in the nuclei. It's so important for cytomegalovirus that the inclusion can be seen both. Megalo means the cells looks large. The cells looks large, the nuclei looks large, the inclusion looks large. It looks like a macronucleoli. So inclusion in the cytoplasm and the nuclei will most of the time we see in the stromal cells and in the endothelial cells. So the site of cytomegalovirus, most of the time endothelial cells and stromal cells, not the epithelial cells. The one that's seen commonly in the epithelial cells is the herpes. Now the herpes simplex, or the herpes virus, we see inclusion within the nuclei. We don't see inclusion in the cytoplasm. In the herpes, we have inclusion, we have triple M's, multinuclei, molting, and so on. So we see inclusion, multinucleation, many times more than one nuclei, and including within the nuclei. Usually, the herpes in the epithelial cells. Okay. This is the microscopic. What we see in the gross in the endoscopy for the cytomegalovirus and in the herpes. Remember, as I said, anywhere, not just in the esophagus. This is representing its characteristics, representing the virus or the pathogen itself. In the herpes, usually we see grossly or endoscopically punched out, very clear cut, punched out ulcer. While in the cytomegalovirus, we see shallow ulcer. So shallow superficial ulcer in cytomegalovirus and punched out ulcer in the head. So this is the gross, microscopic, and clinical presentation. Shallow ulcer, superficial ulcer, punched out ulcer, and membranes. So three characteristics of each of them. Let's ask this guy. Please, you, the gentleman, yeah. What we see in the three types of the infectious esophagitis. I said we have three important types of the esophagus. So what we see grossly and microscopically. Well, let me say, you're busy in something else. You're busy in something else? At least admit it. تعال. Okay, so three clinical presentation, macroscopic or microscopic, تعال نعالج item. Pay attention. The minute you enter, playing wherever. Okay, so the next important topic. Ask two more questions. Yes. Sorry. Margination of the raw material. Usually we see ground glass appearance of the nuclei of the gas. So the nuclei, the chromatin is very fine, looks like ground. What ground glass? What is the translation of ground glass?
See our magnetic state.
Sometimes in the lungs, sometimes in the esophagus. You know, ground glass in Arabic translation. You know, the view of the broken glass, powdered glass. This is ground glass. So reflux esophagitis, and I said it's another, actually number one cause of medical problem that bring the patient into a GI clinic is the reflux. It's really common disease, very common. I think the majority of people sometimes some period of where they are very difficult, you know, and physiologic progression will have some type of reflux esophagitis. The clinical or the clinical association or the clinical termination is the gastroesophageal reflux disease. Gastroesophageal reflux disease. The content of the stomach is going up into the esophagus. So why the reflux that annoying disease? You know the mucosa. The most resistant mucosa in the human body is the squamous mucosa. It's very resistant. It's really resistant mucosa. It's resistant to all type of irritant. So except the acid. And here's the problem. We have a lot of acid in the stomach that can jump into the esophagus. So that's why we have the problem with the reflux. So the etiology of the reflux is as simple as we say anything that can take the acid from the stomach into the esophagus can cause the reflux. You know, any cause. Increase the abdominal pressure, you know, during pregnancy. It's very common one. It's very common one during pregnancy. Always they have reflux disease. Always, actually, in more than 95% of the babies. Or if the sphincter between the esophagus and the stomach is, you know, soft or, you know, not that strong. So the esophageal sphincter, you know, if it's not that tight, the content of the stomach is going into the esophagus. Do we have secretion in the esophagus? No, actually, the squamous mucosa usually is not secreted mucosa. There's no mucus secreted. But we do have secretion in the esophagus. Remember, in the proximal and in the distal part of the esophagus, we have some glands, some mucosal gland that can secrete some mucus. But it's not enough to protect against the reflux disease. So this is the idea of the reflux disease. With the age of the reflux disease, you know, most of the cases in the clinic seen at around 40 and above. However, we can see reflux disease actually in all age group. In all age group, can we see reflux disease? And I don't know if it's a new disease or not. Nowadays we see more and more of what looks like reflux disease, which we call eosinophilic esophagitis, in pediatric age group. It's very, very annoying and important one nowadays. I don't know if it's a new disease or it's just a disease that we missed out the diagnosis before, or just newly introduced disease, the eosinophilic esophagitis in pediatric age group. So most of the time, the GERD or gastroesophageal reflux disease can be seen around the age of 40, but it can be seen in other age. Rarely the GERD or reflux disease can be, interrupted with some acute phases. Sometimes keep in mind the acute phases or the acute attacks of reflux disease is very similar to the myocardial infarction. So it can cause severe pain in the chest sometimes. So keep it as a differential diagnosis of acute myocardial infarction. The treatments for the reflux disease, it's better to avoid whatever causing the increase in the abdominal pressure if we can. Many times we give some anti-acid. Sometimes the proton pump inhibitors work very well in usual cases of reflux. You have a question? The complication of the reflux disease, we can have ulceration, we have hematemesis, we have melena, rarely we have strictures, and actually in the real life practice, the most important complication of the reflux disease is the Barrett esophagus. Why? Because Barrett esophagus is a pre-cancer disease. So it's really important complication of the reflux disease. It's clear cut that we never seen Barrett disease as a disease, we never seen without reflux disease. So it's a clear cut connection between the reflux disease and the Barrett disease. And why Barrett disease is important? Because Barrett disease is a pre-cancer lesion. A pre-cancer lesion of what kind of cancer? Adenocarcinoma. Nowadays the adenocarcinoma see more and more adenocarcinoma in some areas of the world, more common than the previously known as #1 cancer, which is the squamous cell carcinoma. So we see more and more cases of the adenocarcinoma. The cause of most of these adenocarcinoma actually Barrett disease, and the cause of Barrett disease is just simple reflux disease. So reflux disease, Barrett, adenocarcinoma, and that's why we focus more and more on the study of the GERD or reflux disease. So what we see in the reflux disease in the endoscopy or in the microscopic examination. We know the clinical symptoms of the GERD or the reflux disease, the clinical presentation of extra acid in the esophagus, esophagus. If we do the endoscopy, what we see in the majority of cases, we see kind of hyperemia. It looks like congested. The esophagus, the lower part of the esophagus, it looks like the congested. So congested esophagus. Usually we take biopsies to know what's causing or what's the pathogenesis or the pathology behind this condition. Then we figure out the final diagnosis of the GERD or the reflux disease. So what we see in the microscopic biopsy, remember features of the reflux disease. I said grossly or endoscopically, we see hyperemia, congestion. In the microscopic examination, this is the papilla. You know where's the arrow? Do you see the arrow? This is the papilla. Usually the papilla or the stromal element from the lamina propria, usually it goes up to the 1/3 of the epidermis. So if this the thickness of the epidermis, if this is the whole thickness of the epidermis, we remember the papilla to stop here. I said 1/3. In the reflux disease, we see the papilla extending much higher. You see the papilla here, it's ending very high, close to the cervix. So this is the base here, this is the base, and the papilla extending up to the cervix of the epidermis. You see it there? It's clear cut, isn't it? So here's another one. So the papilla extending, the papilla going up into the close to the cervix, actually more than 3/3 of the thickness of the epidermis. This is one feature. The other feature is the congestion in a red color. The red color means RBC, which means it's congestion. So we see congestion, we see extending of the papilla upper high, and we see chronic inflammatory infiltrate, as well as some neutrophil and eosinophil. Eosinophils are really important in the diagnosis of blood. You know, it's extremely rare to see eosinophils in normal squamous cell carcinoma. We can see rare eosinophils. So if we see more than the eosinophils, that means it's a good sign for reflux disease. So 3 features or 4 features: congestion, extending of the papilla upper eye, and we see inflammatory infiltrate, we see some lymphocytes, some neutrophils, and we see eosinophils. So these are the features of the reflux disease. These are the microscopy of reflux disease. The mucosa itself, or the epidermis itself, or the epithelium itself, it looks like thickened. It's more thick than normal. Not that important, but usually it's thick. But the major component or the major feature, the irritation of the papilla upper eye, congestion, and chronic as well as acute inflammatory infiltrate, mainly eosinophils. Very few lymphocytes, very few neutrophils, but the major cell that we need to look for is the eosinophils. These are the features of. Yes, please.
Doctor, so the only difference between GERD and histology and esophagus besides the age aspect?
Between and eosinophilic?
Esophagitis.
No, we will come later on. So these are the features of the reflux disease or GERD. Okay, now we move into another entity, the eosinophilic esophagitis. You know, as I said in the recent years, I don't know why we see more and more cases of this entity. Is it immunity? Might be immunity. I don't think immunity. I think because nowadays we have more pediatric gastroenterologists. Nowadays we see more and more endoscopy in pediatric in childhood age. So nowadays, because we have more endoscopy in the age that children, we never used to have endoscopy for esophagus problem before. You know, rarely, very rarely. Nowadays, it's common, you know, with the big number of pediatric gastroenterologists. Any complaints like the plaque disease in the pediatric age group, they do the endoscopy, and now we see more and more the eosinophilic esophagitis. Be careful that the age of eosinophilic esophagitis can be seen in childhood and can be seen in the other age group in adulthood. The symptoms of eosinophilic esophagitis looks like very close to reflux, very close. In addition to kind of food infection or dysphagia, but in the majority of cases, the presentation is kind of reflux disease. So what the difference between reflux disease and esophagitis? The difference is this disease is resistant to the normal treatment of reflux disease. You know, reflux disease, we give the anti-acid, the hormone inhibitors, and the patient usually do well with this medication. In eosinophilic esophagitis, the patient will not respond to this kind of treatment because in the majority of cases, they need some kind of corticosteroid, either locally or systemically. So what we see in the eosinophilic esophagitis, I said the clinical very similar to the GERD. However, the patient usually not respond to the regular treatment. What we see in eosinophilic esophagitis in the microscopic grossly, again, we see some kind of hyperemia or congestion in the esophagus. However, in the microscopic examination, I think we see some eosinophils in GERD. In eosinophilic esophagitis, we see a lot of eosinophils in GERD. We see too many eosinophils in GERD. So sometimes we see clusters, sometimes we see clusters with kind of upslide clusters of eosinophils in eosinophilic esophagitis. So we never see clusters of eosinophils in plaque. However, in eosinophilic esophagitis, we see clusters of them. So too many eosinophils, usually the microscopic cutoff for eosinophilic esophagitis, it's 20 in high power field. 20. If we see 20 eosinophils in high power field, then diagnosis we made of eosinophilic esophagitis. In addition to the clinical setup of eosinophilic esophagitis. So as the name says, eosinophilic esophagitis is too many eosinophils, more than 20 eosinophils in one high power field. Now we move to Barrett esophagus. Barrett esophagus is a complication, as I said, is a complication of GERD. The Barrett esophagus is important clinically because it is a pre-cancer lesion, because it is the cause in the majority of cases of adenocarcinoma. So what we see in Barrett, Barrett esophagus is kind of the plastic change, the continuous induction of acid into the mucosa will change the mucosa from squamous mucosa into mucus or columnar mucosa or columnar that's producing mucin or mucus. So columnar epithelium with the mucus cells, with the mucus protein cells, and instead of the squamous epithelium. So this is in general what we see in Barrett's esophagus. So the transformation of the squamous epithelium into a columnar epithelium with mucin producing what we call goblet cells. The major cell producing using the intestinal mucosa is goblet cell. So usually in the parent esophagus, the mucus producing cell, the goblet cell. So parent esophagus is a pre-malignant lesion because it causes adenocarcinoma. Just remember that not all the cases of reflux disease go into parent esophagus. Very minor number of these cases. So not any reflux disease goes into parent esophagus. And not each parent esophagus goes into an adenocarcinoma. Just minor percentage of cases can go from GERD into parent esophagus, and another minor cases goes from parent esophagus into an adenocarcinoma. The age of parent esophagus usually 40 to 60. It takes time, it takes time to transfer the mucosa into parent and child mucosa. And it takes time for the mucosa to transform into an adenocarcinoma. How did mucosa transform into an adenocarcinoma? By the idea of dysplasia. Dysplasia, we start with mild dysplasia, moderate dysplasia, and the columnar epithelium, then severe or high-grade dysplasia, and then carcinoma in situ, and finally invasive adenocarcinoma. So this is the progression of the parent esophagus in general. As I said before, very minor number of cases transform from parent esophagus into adenocarcinoma because we need to have dysplasia first, and the percentage of dysplasia in this time 1% of patients with parent esophagus. So the idea of parent esophagus is to identify the disease first, number one. First one to identify the disease, then to know if there is dysplasia or not. Then third step is to follow up this patient. So identify the disease, find if there is dysplasia or not. If there is no dysplasia, the patient is fine. We can just bring him back maybe after a year or more. And then if we find or if we confirm the presence of dysplasia, we need to say what kind of dysplasia. Is it mild, is it moderate, severe dysplasia? Then follow up the patient with this dysplasia and manage the patient with this kind of dysplasia. The majority of cases of adenocarcinoma and the esophagus actually originate from parent esophagus. However, as I said, very minor percentage of parent esophagus can transform into an adenocarcinoma. So this is the way we see it in clinical practice. So the morphology of parent esophagus. In the endoscopy, we say usually the mucosa, normal mucosa is squamous mucosa. What's the color of squamous mucosa? Endoscopy. White. Grayish white. Is it gray to white? Yeah, gray to white. What the color for the columnar? Light brown. Dark, close to the red color, to the brown color. So the color is very important. We can see that this is squamous mucosa and the other one is like different mucosa. Actually, this is the way we see it in parent esophagus. As I said, the idea or the pathology of parent esophagus is the transformation of the squamous mucosa into columnar mucus producing mucosa. So what we see in the endoscopy, we see tons or eyes or areas of light brown, dark, red mucosa within the squamous mucosa. So areas of the squamous epithelium transforming into columnar mucosa. This is what we see in the endoscopy, in the lower part of the esophagus. Tongues or eyelids or spaces or areas of dark lights, brown, dark color, congested, whatever, change in the normal grayish white mucus. This is the endoscopy. And we know the patient is a long story of reflux disease. This is a clinical scenario of the child. You know what I'm trying to explain is the way we diagnose paralysis. So the clinical history of what looks like reflux disease, we do the endoscopy, we see something weird, we see some light brown or dark or red mucosa within the lower squamous white gray mucosa, and we suspect here the diagnosis of esophagus. So how can we confirm the diagnosis? We take biopsy from these areas in the lower part of the esophagus. We take biopsy including the red, brown areas that should represent the columnar epithelium and the adjacent squamous epithelium to confirm the presence of columnar dysplasia or a columnar epithelium in this area. Then in the microscopy, if the microscopy coming back with the diagnosis, we have a columnar mucosa with goblet cells. Then the diagnosis is parent esophagus. So the diagnosis of parent esophagus, is it enough to take a biopsy from the lower part of the esophagus and find columnar mucosa with goblet cells? Is it enough for the diagnosis of parent esophagus? So it's not enough to diagnose. And this is a major mistake in clinical practice. This is a major mistake in clinical practice. That the clinician see the biopsy from the lower at the junction of the stomach and the esophagus. And the diagnosis comes as columnar epithelium and goblet cells, parent esophagus. Is this right? Absolutely wrong. The diagnosis of parent esophagus is clinical pathology diagnosis. By the way, this is a very important, this is a very common mistake in clinical practice. It's very common running mistake in clinical practice that the pathologist is giving a biopsy from the lower part of the esophagus and the final diagnosis from the pathologist and experience of our side is columnar mucosa with goblet cells. This is parent esophagus. As simple as this, the consequence is diagnosis really, really bad because they need to bring the patient again and again for the endoscopy, for the follow-up, and the patient doesn't have parent esophagus. He just have some metaplastic change that can be seen at the junction between the esophagus and the stomach. So metaplastic epithelium and columnar mucosa can be seen sometimes at the junction level between the esophagus and the stomach. So the presence of columnar epithelium with goblet cells is not diagnosis at all of parent esophagus. The diagnosis of parent esophagus needs the clinical pathologist, need the clinician to tell you, I have seen eyelids or tongues of dark, red, brown areas at the lower part of the squamous epithelium. It means he or she have seen something suspicious of parent esophagus. Then the diagnosis of the pathologist will be, yes, we have a columnar epithelium with goblet cells. Then the final diagnosis consistent or suggestive of parent esophagus. So this is really important to memorize, to remember. Diagnosis of Barrett's esophagus. It should be clinical pathology. It needs to have the clinical, the endoscopic features, plus the microscopic features of columnar epithelium with goblet cells. You see, this is the normal junction between the stomach and the esophagus. So the normal esophagus is here, and we see here the tongues of the mucosa, abnormal mucosa, dark red brown mucosa instead of the white gray mucosa. We take biopsies from here. This is the stomach. This is the stomach, and this is the esophagus. So here at the junction, we take biopsies to see this. We see here columnar mucosa, see the columnar mucosa and goblet cells in adjacent to the squamous epithelium. So here we make the diagnosis of Barrett's esophagus by the clinical and the microscopic. Clinical means the endoscopic findings. These are goblet cells in the columnar mucosa. We need, most of the time we see goblet cells in the Barrett's esophagus. Again, if we see a box like this, is it diagnostic of Barrett's esophagus? What is the diagnosis? What is that? What do you see? Columnar mucosa. I see here. I see. What's that? Columnar epithelium with goblet cells. Is this Barrett? I don't know. It's a columnar mucosa. It might be taken from upper part of the stomach. You can see something like that. You can see goblets and change in the upper part of the stomach. So this is columnar epithelium with goblet cells. In the right clinical set, this light represents Barrett's esophagus. Okay. So dysplasia is what the concern in Barrett's esophagus. The dysplasia means the columnar epithelium has some dysplastic change. What is dysplastic change? Dysplastic change means atypical nuclear change, which includes what is dysplastic change? Nuclear exterior. So what is nuclear exterior? Nuclear exterior. What is nuclear exterior? Usually, high ratio, mitosis, hyperchromasia, enlargement, pleomorphic nuclei, irregular nuclear membrane, macronucleolar. All of these are features of dysplasia. How we grade them depends on the dysplastic change. Dysplastic change can be either low grade, moderate, severe. Of course, the higher the grade of dysplasia, the higher the possibility into continuing into adenocarcinoma and cycle, then invasive carcinoma. So dysplasia start with low grade dysplasia, moderate dysplasia, and high grade dysplasia. Just remember that dysplastic change in the Barrett's esophagus. Usually we look at the cellular level. However, even the architecture of the glands are important. And many times we see the gland overcrowded, the gland pleomorphic, and are some of them small, some of them large, irregular. So it's both architectural and nuclear. Usually dysplasia in anywhere in the body, we look at the cellular change, the nuclear change. However, also the architectural changes are important to define the dysplasia. So both architectural and nuclear or cellular. This is a high-grade dysplasia. You see the cells are hyperchromatic. And the right side, you see the Barrett's esophagus. Here comes the cells are really big, high insulation, enzymatic, multiple mitosis, hyperchromasia, irregular nuclear membrane, stratification, whatever. No? So this is a high-grade dysplasia. Intramucosal carcinoma, it's within the mucosal dysplasia will be remarkable, and it looks like carcinoma in situ or intramucosal carcinoma. So it's going step by step, the dysplasia. The clinical of Barrett esophagus, it's same as the GERD because it goes by the reflux disease. Usually it presents with GERD symptoms or reflux disease. The management of Barrett esophagus depend actually. If it's just a Barrett esophagus without dysplasia, it's completely different than the management of patient with Barrett esophagus and dysplasia. Then dysplasia, if it is low-grade dysplasia, it's just a follow-up of the patient. If it's severe dysplasia and widely extended dysplasia and high-grade dysplasia, we might end with the many type of procedures like laser excision, like taking the whole mucosa out by surgery, and so on. We will go through this in the clinical lectures. So the management depends on the stage, the level of the dysplastic change. If there is invasion or not, if the dysplasia is high grade, if there is in situ cancer, if there is invited cancer, and so on. Esophageal tumors. Esophageal tumors, we can see any type of tumor in the esophagus, any type. Segment tumor, benign tumor, malignant tumor. Benign tumors can be seen in the esophagus. However, most of the neoplastic deposits in the esophagus actually are cancer. Benign tumors, the most common benign tumor in the esophagus is the leiomyoma. We can see some other type of tumor like neurofibroma, neurolymphoma, benign lymphocyte, whatever. But usually the most common one is the leiomyoma in the esophagus. Majority of tumors in the esophagus actually are cancers. As I said, we can see any other type of tumors in the esophagus. The most common neoplastic deposits are two. Adenocarcinoma as a consequence of Barrett esophagus and squamous cell carcinoma. Two important cancers. Adenocarcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma. We can see lymphoma, we can see sarcoma, we can see any kind of tumor, same as anywhere in the body. But the most common one are the adenocarcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma. Adenocarcinoma, it looks like it's coming more and more nowadays. It's usually at the background of esophagus. Risk of adenocarcinoma actually increased. The higher the dysplastic change, the higher the probability of adenocarcinoma in the esophagus. It looks like it's increased the risk with the tobacco use. Smoking is a clear-cut risk factor for adenocarcinoma. Also, radiotherapy in the chest area is a risk factor for adenocarcinoma. Apparently, with the studies, the risk is low with the diet rich in fresh fruits and vegetables, same as any kind of carcinoma in the GI tract. The diet rich in fruit and fibers actually lowering the risk of chronic adenocarcinoma. It's a clear-cut one. Some H. pylori, nowadays they talk about some H. pylori reduce the risk of adenocarcinoma in the esophagus, as if it is a big issue. You get infected with the H. pylori as incentive. Get infected with H. pylori, you reduce the risk of adenocarcinoma in the esophagus. It's true because many times, H. pylori type pylori can reduce or cause atrophy in the GI or the gastric mucosa. If we have atrophy in the gastric mucosa, the production of acid would be much lower. If we don't have acid, we don't have paraesophagus. If we don't have paraesophagus, then the risk of, or we don't have the adenocarcinoma. So it's true that if you have H. pylori that causing atrophic gastritis, you can have a lower risk of adenocarcinoma. The risk or the ethnic group that be involved in cancer. And many times, this one seen in white, the other seen in black, the third seen in Hispanic. So what are the ones that are important in clinical practice? Let me say that. The ones that are important in clinical practice are the ones where you see clinical contradiction. Like here in the area of esophageal cancer. Is it important here? How do we remember this is more in white and the other more in black? Actually, in the esophagus, it's important because adenocarcinoma is remarkably more common in white. And the other cancer, the esophageal carcinoma, is more common in black. So that's why it's important the issue that the white are more in the carcinoma clearly more common in white, while the squamous cell carcinoma is more common in black. It doesn't mean the prognosis is bad in white and less bad or the better in black. Actually, the prognosis for adenocarcinoma is more than in white, but the person or the cancer is more in white than in black. So adenocarcinoma, remember this, more common seen in white, mid white. Okay, the squamous carcinoma is more in black. The location of adenocarcinoma, where you expect the location? Okay, the lower one. So male, white, and lower third of the white. So it makes it because parent is actually in the lower part. This is another issue, the location of the tumor. So white, mid, lower part of the esophagus. In the squamous cell carcinoma, black, and the location of the cancer usually in the mid and the upper third. It can be seen anywhere, but usually in the mid and the upper thirds of the esophagus. So this is how can we approach the cancer in the esophagus. Otherwise, the incidence of adenocarcinoma in the West now more common than squamous cell carcinoma. Clinically, both of them the same. Pain, dysphagia, mass lesion in the esophagus. Mass lesion, the mass lesion can be oil, can be ulcerative, can be whatever in the esophagus. The most important issue here to remember is the location of the mass. If the location in the lower part of the esophagus, then this is likely to be adenocarcinoma. If the location in the middle, usually it is squamous cell carcinoma. The age, both of them actually 40 to 60. 40 is very low, actually above 50, 60 years for adenocarcinoma. So clinically, both of them, squamous cell carcinoma and adenocarcinoma present as the cancer. And sometimes in the late stage of the cancer, we have a weight loss, we have secondary complaints in any type of cancer. But usually pain and dysphagia for both cancers. Endoscopy, location, mass lesion, both of them are actually the same. Mass lesion can be polypoid, can be solid, can be ulcerative, can be papillary like projection. So the cross is not diagnostic at all in any type of location is important, and we take biopsy. Remember one more thing. The prognosis of adenocarcinoma. So prognosis of it's very good. Esophageal cancers are one of the worst cancers in the GI tract. Remember, some cancers, the diagnosis or the day or the bad diagnosis means a death certificate. One of them is this cancer. It's one of the worst cancer in the clinical practice. Esophageal cancer. The prognosis is really poor. The 5-year survival is really, really low. Unless we discover the cancer in early stage. So we follow up a patient with figures and we pick up the cancer in early stage. This is the area, this is the time we can say the prognosis for the 5-year survival. It's okay. It's indicated in the early stage. Believe me, it's extremely rare to pick up esophageal cancer in early stage. The day we pick up esophageal cancer, usually it will be an advanced stage. The lymph node is discarded, the lesion is discarded. The thyroid goes into the intestinal direct extension, it can go to that lymph node, it can go to any other area. So, usually bad prognosis for esophageal adenocarcinoma. So the same is about the squamous cell carcinoma. Chromosomal or molecular studies, most of the time there is no definite molecular change in adenocarcinoma. Many times we see the P53 mutation in advanced adenocarcinoma. Sometimes we see the CDKN2A, P16, and others in the adenocarcinoma. Late stage, we can see the cyclin D1 and cyclin E, EGFR. There is no clear-cut molecular change in the adenocarcinoma. Just in the late stage, we see the EGFR, we see the beta, so on. So the molecular is not actually that much helpful in adenocarcinoma. The cross exam for adenocarcinoma, lower third of the esophagus, lower third, mass lesion, polypoid, ulcerated. The cross actually not difficult. The diagnosis between adenocarcinoma and exactly the location helps, but the gross appearance is mass lesion, solid, variable, ulcerated, whatever, any kind of actually not just in the esophagus, same in the stomach, same in the colon. The gross appearance is not diagnostic at all of what kind of cancer. All the same. Mass lesion, solid, variable, ulcerated, necrotic, whatever, papillary, polypoid. All of these terms actually use this in the diagnosis of this cancer. The final diagnosis, actually, it need to take a biopsy, and we see the biopsy the invasive adenocarcinoma. So this is an adenocarcinoma, it's like invading into the lamina and ovarian. So usually the differentiation or the grade we based on grade 1, low grade will differentiate, moderate will differentiate, full differentiate. So this is an invasive adenocarcinoma. So it is esophageal adenocarcinoma. After this picture taken from colon. So it's the same, adenocarcinoma is the same. In the stomach, in the esophagus, the colon, and so on. What's important to know, there's diagnosis, then the grade, low grade, moderate, high grade, carcinoma. So this is all about the adenocarcinoma. Squamous cell carcinoma, as I said, of all age group, usually above 50, Remember the key factor, it's common in black, the location of the cancer mid, esophagus, mid and upper esophagus, and squamous differentiation. Mass lesion, ulcerative, polypoid, nodular, capillary, whatever. So this is the growth and the microscopic appearance, we see the squamous cell differentiation. Risk factors. Risk factor for squamous cell carcinoma, the alcohol, tobacco use, poverty, all of these actually are risk factors. Can you stop discussing these issues? When you gonna stop? I'm watching you since 5-10 minutes. You never stop, you continue as if you are chatting somewhere. This is last warning for you. I dare you to hear you or to see you doing any such a distraction next time. Not this time. This time is done. And next time you sit here, okay? In my lecture, I will see you here with the VIP. Okay, what's your name? What's your name? You know yourself. No, the one beside you. He's chatting with you. He's the one chatting. What's your name? Sorry? Okay, so next time you'll be here, okay? Here. Squamous cell carcinoma, as any squamous cell carcinoma anywhere in the human body, in the GI tract, in the reproductive system, can be associated with the HPV infection. So just remember tobacco use, alcohol, poverty, HPV, all of these risk factors for squamous cell carcinoma. There is countries, the location, geographic location for squamous cell carcinoma. It's well known that squamous cell carcinoma, it's really common in some areas and not in others. It's common in Iran, central China, Hong Kong, Argentina, Brazil. So this is the geographic distribution for the squamous cell carcinoma. Again, presentation, pain and dysphagia. Pain and dysphagia. Location, we said the location. The prognosis of squamous cell carcinoma is very, very bad one, In general, adenocarcinoma of the esophagus, it's carry a very poor. Yes.
The last slide.
Yeah, you will go through it in the clinical, kind of web with difficulty in swallowing. It looks like it's a kind of risk factor for squamous cell carcinoma. It's a web with difficulty in swallowing. We'll go through it in 5-year survival. 5-year survival rate for 75%. Actually, we never seen a patient with 5-year survival in squamous cell carcinoma. The prognosis is extremely poor. Usually, the majority, actually 95% of the cases of squamous cell carcinoma in clinical practice seen in late stage. I never seen a squamous cell carcinoma in early stage. I never ever seen squamous cell carcinoma in early stage. Never. Always late stage cancer. Always. It doesn't mean it's not there. Sometimes by incidental findings we can pick it up incidentally, but in real life practice we don't see it. Again, the molecular studies in squamous cell carcinoma, again, actually, there's no definitive diagnosis or no definitive molecular change in squamous cell carcinoma. Sometimes we can find the SOX2 amplification, cyclin D1 and P53. So P53, SOX2 and cyclin D1 are the molecular change that can be seen. HPV You know, we see more and more cases nowadays associated with the HPV squamous cell carcinoma, same as in the cervical cancer, same as in the oral mucosa or in the upper respiratory tract cancer. The HPV nowadays see more and more associated with
It's the same serotype for all of the cancers, right?
Yeah. We always check for HPV nowadays in any esophageal carcinoma. We do always the HPV, we do P16 in any histopathology case of squamous cell carcinoma. Early lesions, gray, white, plaques like extreme. We never seen such presentation in clinical practice. Usually we see it as a mass lesion. They take biopsy and we end with the diagnosis of squamous cell carcinoma. We see the location here in the mid esophagus, usually ulcerated, polypoid, papillary. We take biopsies and we figure it out to be squamous cell carcinoma. The grade, same thing in adenocarcinoma. Will differentiate squamous cell carcinoma, moderately differentiated, and will differentiate. How we grade squamous cell carcinoma? We grade squamous cell carcinoma depending on the squamous differentiation. So if we have a clear cut, very well defined advanced squamous differentiation, it is well differentiated. It's close to the normal mucosa, well differentiated. If we see moderate differentiation in the squamous video, we see keratinization and blah blah. Focus keratinization there and there. This is moderate differentiation. If we don't see keratinization and it's still squamous cell carcinoma, some isolated cell keratinization, then it's grade 3 carcinoma. Solid, always solid with very minimal keratinization. How we do the grading in adenocarcinoma? We look at the glandular differentiation. So in adenocarcinoma, we will look at the glandular differentiation. If we have a high glandular or here glandular differentiation, grade 1, moderate glandular differentiation, grade 2, poor or failed glandular differentiation, grade 3. Sometimes in the adenocarcinoma, we say mucinous adenoma. Why we say mucinous? When we say mucinous adenoma, so mucinous adenocarcinoma is a subtype of adenocarcinoma. And in mucinous adenocarcinoma, we see copious or a lot of mucin production. Sometimes we see signet ring cell carcinoma. The signet ring carcinoma is adenocarcinoma. Yes, it is adenocarcinoma with signet ring cell formation. It's kind of mucinous adenocarcinoma. Remember, signet ring adenocarcinoma is a very bad cancer, it's a high grade cancer. So moderately well differentiated, poorly differentiated carcinoma. Sometimes we see subtypes like mucinous carcinoma, signet ring carcinoma, and so on. Can we see other type of cancer and other type of carcinoma? Yes, we can. Rarely see neuroendocrine carcinoma, small cell carcinoma. All of these are very rare cancer. The most common ones are the adenocarcinoma. Any question? We will take attendance list. Page.